The BT-7 tank. America. Meet the Soviet speed demon that divided history. Picture this. It's the 1930s, and the Soviet Union is flexing its industrial muscles, churning out tanks like nobody's business. Among them is the BT-7, a sleek, lightning-fast tank that had Soviet tankers pumped up and ready to roll. This bad boy was a star, even featured in a hit 1939 Soviet movie, Tractors, which was like the Top Gun of its day. The whole country was singing its praises with a catchy anthem. Roaring with fire, gleaming with steel, our machines charge into the fight. When Comrade Stalin calls us to battle, and Voroshilov leads us to victory. But here's the kicker. Just a couple of years later, by the start of World War II, the BT-7 was getting dragged through the mud. Soviet historians called it light and outdated, barely mentioning it in their records. What happened? How did a tank that was the pride of the Red Army become a pariah? Was it really that bad? Or did it get a raw deal? Buckle up as we unpack this wild ride, diving into history, economics, and some jaw-dropping battlefield stories to find out the truth. The birth of a legend, the BT-7's rise to fame. A tank built for speed. To get why the BT-7 was such a big deal, let's rewind to the early 1930s. The world was still figuring out tanks. Nobody was building machines with thick armor to shrug off anti-tank shells. Tanks were about speed, mobility, and supporting infantry. Enter the BT-7, short for Bystrokodny tank, fast tank. Rolled out in 1935. Inspired by an American design, shout out to John Walter Christie's tank chassis. This machine was a game changer. The BT-7 was a speed demon. It could hit 53 miles per hour on wheels. Yes, wheels. And 38 miles per hour on tracks. Compare that to the German Panzer II, which maxed out at about 25 miles per hour, or the British Crusader, which struggled to hit 27 miles per hour. With a power-to-weight ratio of 33 horsepower per ton, the BT-7 was the Ferrari of tanks. No modern tank even comes close to that kind of zip. Its mission? Not to slug it out in trench warfare, but to race deep into enemy territory, wrecking supply lines, headquarters, and depots. Think of it like a cavalry charge, but with steel and horsepower instead of horses and sabers. The BT-7 was built to outrun and outmaneuver, striking where the enemy least expected. The economic backdrop, Soviet industry in overdrive. To really get the BT-7, you need to understand the Soviet Union in the 1930s. The country was in the middle of a massive industrialization push trying to catch up to the West. By 1935, the Soviets were cranking out around 3,000 tanks a year, way more than Germany's 500 to 700 or the US's modest output. America wasn't big on tanks until later. The BT-7 was a key player in this boom, with about 7,000 built by 1941, making it one of the most common tanks in the Red Army. Economically, the BT-7 was a smart move. It used off-the-shelf parts, like the M17T engine, a repurposed aircraft motor, keeping costs down to about 100,000 to 120,000 rubles per tank, roughly $20,000 to $25,000 in 1930s dollars. For comparison, the T-34, which came later, cost double that. Mass production meant the Soviets could flood the battlefield with tanks, but it came with a catch. Maintaining these machines and training crews was a logistical nightmare, especially for a complex tank like the BT-7. The BT-7 under fire, debunking the haters. Myth number 1, paper-thin armor. The biggest knock on the BT-7? Its armor. At just 20 millimeters thick in the front and 13 to 16 millimeters on the sides, it wasn't exactly a bunker on tracks. But let's put that in perspective. When the BT-7 hit the scene in 1935, nobody had tanks with serious anti-shell armor. The German Panzer II had a measly 14.5 millimeters of armor, and even the later Panzer III and IV started with 15 millimeters, only upgrading to 30 millimeters by 1939. The French Char 2C, with its 75 millimeters armor, was a rare beast. Only 10 were built, and they barely saw combat. Back then, Tanks were designed to stop bullets and shrapnel, not anti-tank rounds, which were still in their infancy. The BT-7's armor was par for the course. Critics who slam it for being too light are judging it by 1941 standards, not 1935. It's like bashing a Model T for not having airbags. Myth number 2. The wheel track system was a bust. Another gripe was the BT-7's wheel track design. It could switch between wheels for road travel and tracks for rough terrain, which sounded awesome. On pavement, it could scream along at 53 miles per hour, saving wear on the tracks. But there was a downside. The rubber on the wheels wore out fast, often after just 120 to 180 miles on hard surfaces like cobblestone or asphalt. Here's the thing, though, in the 1930s, paved roads were rare outside big cities, especially in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. A 120-mile range on wheels was plenty for most operations, especially since enemy defenses were typically only 3 to 6 miles deep. The BT-7 could zip through gaps in the line and wreak havoc in the rear before anyone could react. Sure, the system was tricky to maintain, but it was a bold idea that worked when used right. Myth number 3. Unreliable and high maintenance. The BT-7 got a bad rap for being a diva to maintain. Its wheel track setup needed skilled mechanics, and its M17T engine guzzled fuel, about 1.5 gallons per mile. Later models with the V2 diesel engine were better, stretching the range to 435 miles on a single tank. That's enough to drive from New York City to Pittsburgh without refueling. For context, a German Panzer IV could only manage about 125 to 185 miles. The real issue wasn't the tank itself, but the Red Army's lack of trained crews and mechanics. By 1941, up to 50% of Soviet tanks were sidelined by breakdowns, not combat. The BT-7's complexity made it a victim of this chaos, but that's more about the system than the tank. The BT-7 in action, glory and gaffes. Cock and GOL, the tank's finest hour. Let's talk about the BT-7's moment in the spotlight, the 1939 Battle of Cock and GOL against Japan. Under General Georgy Zhukov, the Soviets unleashed the BT-7 in a textbook example of mobile warfare. One tank brigade covered 500 miles in 6 days, averaging 80 miles a day on tracks through the Mongolian steppe. No small feat. For perspective, during 1991's Desert Storm, U.S. Abrams tanks took 4 days to cover 60 miles to Baghdad, with zero resistance and top-notch logistics. At Cock and GOL, the BT-7 did exactly what it was built for: lightning-fast raids, flanking maneuvers, and smashing Japanese supply lines. The Japanese, expecting slower, conventional attacks, were caught off guard. Zhukov's victory cemented the BT-7's reputation as a beast when used right. Poland 1939. A walk in the park. In the 1939 invasion of Poland, the BT-7 didn't see much combat but proved its worth on long marches. Covering hundreds of miles without breaking down, it showed off its reliability and endurance. These early successes made tankers and commanders believe the BT-7 was unstoppable, until the real test came. World War II, a misused masterpiece. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, everything changed. Instead of using the BT-7 for hit-and-run raids, Soviet commanders threw it into head-on clashes with German tanks and anti-tank guns. This was a disaster. The BT-7's thin armor was no match for German Pak 35-36 guns, nicknamed door knockers, which could punch through it like butter. The Germans avoided direct tank battles, falling back and letting their artillery do the talking. Losses were brutal. Thousands of BT-7s were destroyed in months. But was the tank to blame? Imagine using a Formula One car to haul lumber on a dirt road. The BT-7 was built for speed and surprise, not slugging it out in frontal assaults. Misuse, not design flaws, was its downfall. Hidden wins. The BT-7 in ambushes. When commanders got it right, the BT-7 shone. In rare cases, it was used for ambushes, darting out to hit German flanks and vanishing before they could respond. Its 45mm gun could take out most German tanks of 1941, like the Panzer II and early Panzer IIIs. These moments showed what the BT-7 could do with smart tactics, stacking up against the competition. How did the BT-7 compare to its rivals? Let's break it down. German Panzer III, 1937 15 to 30 mm armor, 25 miles per hour top speed, 37 mm gun. Solid, but slower and less range than the BT-7's 435 miles. French Somua S-35, 1935 up to 47 mm armor, 25 miles per hour, 47 mm gun. Tougher but less mobile and produced in small numbers. British Crusader, 1940 mm armor, 27 miles per hour, 40 mm gun. Decent, but its 125-mile range paled next to the BT-7. The BT-7's speed and range made it a standout for mobile warfare. If World War II had been fought like the Soviets planned, fast, deep strikes, it might have been a game-changer. Instead, the grinding battles of 1941 exposed its limits. The economic angle, the cost of mistakes. Economically, the BT-7 was a bargain. At $20,000 to $25,000 a pop in 1930s dollars, it was half the price of a T-34. Mass production let the Soviets build an armored juggernaut, but the lack of trained crews and spare parts was a killer. Historical records show that in 1941, nearly half of Soviet tank losses were due to breakdowns, not enemy fire. The BT-7's complexity made it especially vulnerable to this. The U.S. faced similar issues early in World War II. The M3 Stuart, a light tank with 38 mm armor and a 37 mm gun, was fast but underpowered against German panzers. Like the BT-7, it struggled when misused, showing that even great designs need the right support. The BT-7's final act, from Moscow to Manchuria. Despite its rough start in 1941, the BT-7 kept fighting. It saw action at Moscow, Stalingrad, the Caucasus, and Leningrad. By 1943 to 1944, as heavier tanks like the T-34 took over, the BT-7 was relegated to secondary roles. But it got one last chance to shine. In August 1945, during the Soviet invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria, about 1,000 BT-7s roared into action. Their speed was perfect for the wide-open terrain, helping crush the Japanese Guandong Army. The victory parade in Harbin marked the BT-7's final bow, a fitting end to a decade of service. Lessons from the BT-7, what America can learn. The BT-7 story is a classic case of right tool, wrong job. It was a masterpiece of mobile warfare, but World War II's brutal, static battles didn't play to its strengths. It's like trying to use a sports car in a demolition derby. The lesson? Even the best tech is useless without the right strategy and training. For Americans, this resonates with our own military history. Think of the F-4 Phantom jet in Vietnam, designed for high-speed dogfights but often misused in ground attack roles, leading to heavy losses. The BT-7 reminds us that innovation needs execution to succeed. The BT-7 wasn't perfect, but it wasn't the flop its critics claimed. It was a bold, forward-thinking design that could have changed the game in a different war. Its speed, range, and daring spirit make it a fascinating chapter in tank history. So let's tip our hats to the BT-7, a Soviet speedster that deserves more respect than it got.
Yo, tank fans.
If you loved this deep dive, smash that subscribe button for more epic military history. Drop a comment. Do you think the BT-7 was a misunderstood hero or a flawed machine? Share your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation rolling.